Hi everyone. So today I'm going to be talking about visual aids. As you begin working on your presentations, I want you to be keeping in mind the elements of visual design that you're using. These are as important as verbal and written communication, so it's important for us to talk about them. So the purpose of any kind of visual in business communication is to make things more interesting, to enhance your credibility, to serve as a guide, to communicate complex ideas quickly, to reinforce your verbal message, and to help the audience retain information. This is at large the purpose of any kind of visual that you'll be using or you'll be working with. And this does, in fact, mean the visual components of, say, the Word documents that you're creating as well. Even though that those design elements are invisible in many ways, they still achieve these purposes as well as any images that you might use. So with creating visuals, one of the most important things, as with any active business communication, but with visuals especially, preparation is really important. In order to make sure that things are pulled off well, whether in a presentation or sending an image to somebody, you need to make sure that you are creating visuals that are user tested. You create something, you make sure that they are clear enough for various audiences, simple enough for various audiences, and consistent, as well as large enough for people to actually see. So in terms of preparation, putting together an image or a presentation at the last minute is really often a bad idea, specifically because you're not getting another set of eyes on it. And that's perhaps even more important in visual communication than with written communication, simply because you can we tend to have an easier time understanding how people are going to read internally something that we write. In speaking, we can actually see people's reactions, we can prepare it ahead of time, but with visual communication, this is something that actually does need another set of eyes on it. And just like in any of those other kinds of modes of communication, you're still preparing. So there's as much an element of preparation in visual communication as there is with written and spoken. So some of the methods and materials that you might be using in your presentations or in putting together a visual aid, you might be using diagrams, charts to communicate data, infographics especially. Many of you are going to be doing a screen capture of PowerPoint presentations, and PowerPoint presentations are very much a mainstay of any kind of business context. You might also be dealing with models, so objects that you're demoing for people. There's going to be audio visual elements, and you may, in some kind of presentation, um, include handouts so that people can actually handle what they can have a material component of what you're actually saying to them. So I'm going to be talking now about more universal principles of design, and then I'm going to focus on two aspects that I expect you guys probably to be dealing with most, two genres, and that's the PowerPoint and the graphic. But in general, um, there are what we call universal principles of design, also known as the CRAP principles, and yes, we do call them the CRAP principles. They are contrast, repetition, alignment, and proximity. What I want to say about this before I get down into what contrast, repetition, alignment, and proximity are is for you guys kind of question this idea of universal principle of design. We've talked a lot about cross-cultural communication, especially in a business context. There is an assumption about what design should be, and that is that it should be invisible. But there are going to be situations where what is invisible to you or to your cultural context is not invisible to another. And so it's really important, again, this is that element of preparation. It's really important to be thinking about the design, the actual format, the medium of what you're creating, perhaps as heavily as you're thinking about the content of your communications. And that's because these things communicate things implicitly, they communicate things quickly. We talked about non-verbal communication earlier in the semester. Visual communication is implicit and immediate. And so it's important for you to be preparing for what those immediate and implicit reactions to your format are going to be. So, getting into the CRAP principles, first I want to talk about contrast. Contrast is the use of different fonts, italics, bolds, bullets, and spacing. What contrast does is it creates a sense of hierarchy. So in this presentation, you can see that this large text, that is what draws your eye. It's large, it's big. It draws your eye more than the text to the right of it, which is small, and it's a thinner font. So this is creating a sense of hierarchy through contrast. What draws your eye in these two pieces of text is what you're supposed to pay attention to. That is what's important. So there's a sense of hierarchy in that information. It also controls where the reader's eye goes. So automatically you're going to be drawn to the thing that has more contrast in relation to other things. And it also allows readers to focus in certain areas. So when I see this contrast, I know that I'm supposed to focus on the thing that stands out more. So now moving to repetition. Repetition is exactly what it sounds like. It's reusing the same or similar elements across a document. And what this does is it creates a sense of wholeness, coherence, and consistency throughout the whole document. It allows readers to rely on something throughout the document, which is really important if you're trying to kind of create an overall argument for why they might want to buy your product or buy into a specific process that you're trying to implement. It also allows, well, in any case, you can see here in this exact slide that there are elements of this presentation, and in fact of all my presentations, that are repetitious. And this is so that I can kind of create, even though this is it's a Google Slides, theme that's built into Google Slides, this is something that I have created for our class so that we can actually have kind of a brand, so to speak. This is something that's common across all the slides. And so you can see something that anytime you open up a presentation, it's going to be something that you can rely on. So alignment is, again, the same. It's pretty self-sufficient or self-evident. Alignment is that every element is connected by an invisible line. And there may be differences in these lines. So the titles of all of these slides are, set differently than the bullets, but every title is set at the same place. So there's even an invisible line across slides. Nothing looks randomly placed. Everything looks very, very specific and deliberate. Again, this creates a sense of coherence and consistency, but this is within smaller units of a document as opposed to the wholeness of the document. There's a sense of cleanliness and professionality, and it allows readers to move through steps easily, so they know where to look because of this kind of invisible line that's in the design. So you can see here all of the bullet points that are gray are all in a row, and so they look very clean. They look very pleasing. The others over here to the right, the black bullets, they don't, and it is awful. There's something very, very upsetting about I don't know if any of you have any kind of like OCD or even perfectionists. You can tell that this is not the way it's supposed to be, and it's very upsetting. And people in your audience are going to see things that are not in alignment. And finally, this says alignment, but this is actually proximity. The P is proximity. This is where elements are closer together or farther apart, and this creates a balanced sense of space. There's also a sense of grouping and relationship. So items that are closer together, they are related. Items farther apart are not. And this allows you, the reader, or me, the reader, to easily organize information. So here, I know that these two sentences on the left, because they're together, they belong to each other. They're related. The sentences on the right, they're close to each other, so they're related to each other, but they're different than the ones on the left. And so this is proximity. So what does bad design look like? this is bad design. So one, it's boring to look at. Two, it's confusing. We don't know which way to go with it. We don't know where there are breaks. We don't know what's most important. Um, the kind of block text format is not at all helpful for giving me an opportunity as a reader to just kind of breathe and take in the kind of manageable bite that I've just read. And it's incredibly difficult to look at. We also, the sense of alignment isn't clear. I'm not sure, why certain lines are broken where they are. So this is something to keep in mind for your designs, whether they're images or documents. Many of you have given me documents that are full block texts, and I've at times commented on this to say, try to break this up into more manageable bites, and that's something that's definitely a bad element of the design here. So now moving to PowerPoint, which is what many of you guys are going to be working in. Some things to keep in mind about PowerPoint. PowerPoint is not a means to replace your message. It is a means of support. So one example of this is these PowerPoints that I offer up to you. You can't get all the information you need without actually listening to the video. The presentation is the content. The PowerPoint is an aid, but does not replace the message that I give you in these videos. You want to use simple pictures and graphics. Same design principles as in written documents: contrast, repetition, alignment, and proximity. Typically, you want to keep one key idea to each slide so that you're not overloading your audience. It needs to be big enough so that it's visible from the back of a room. Make sure you have analogous colors, contrasting colors. At times, this is where color theory actually comes in handy, because we understand that, for example, green and orange are on the opposite ends of the color spectrum, so these are pleasing colors together. This creates unity. Consider printing copies of the presentation if you're giving it in person. Again, those handouts, this lets people follow along at their own pace. And then always, if you're doing this in person, always check the technology before the presentation starts and have a backup plan. Because I've been in many teaching situations, in fact, where the technology fails, and I have nothing to kind of replace that. So having that plan B is even more imperative in a business context. Do's and don'ts: make a clear connection between your words, what you're saying, and the visual. Again, it's not replacing your message, it's aiding you. Don't distract the audience with your visual aid. Don't block their view or repeatedly fidgeting with the visual aid, whether it's an object or you're moving the cursor around on the screen. Speak to your audience, not the visual. So you're not going to be presenting to the information to the visual, which I think at times we have a tendency to do. Again, you're facing the audience. You're not you're not allowing the visual to be the message only. You are speaking the message to the audience and allowing the visual to also speak the message too. Don't spend your energy on flashiness, things like the animations, the built-in animations. Again, make sure things are consistent, clear, big enough to see, and simple. And again, do focus on planning and creating with quality and with simplicity in mind. And lastly, just a few mentions about graphics. I'm not asking you to explicitly have a graphic. I give you the option of doing a PowerPoint, but just a note about graphics. They are typically not included in formal communications. So this is going to be, graphics are usually used in presentations or in informal contexts. They're not going to be in your printed, for example, your printed formal report or your analysis. They're used to communicate data information and to guide users to important content. And like PowerPoint, they are not a replacement for textual content. If you have graphics, you need to also have text that explains that. And also with graphics, they can tend to be very iffy as far as technology goes. Make sure that your file size is not incredibly large so that people can't actually open what you've given them. Make sure it's the right format. for it's a more standard format so that anybody who opens your file can actually see it. Make sure that you keep things like disability and accessibility in mind with graphics. Are they communicating to many different to many different cultures, cross-cultural contexts? Um, and of course, usability. As I said in the beginning, making sure that someone else gets their eyes on what you've created so that they can tell you, well, I didn't get this information from that, or my eye came here instead of where you wanted it to go. So keep those things in mind, and that's it for visual.